Hey everybody, welcome back to the Calibrate Tools channel, where we talk about tools and how to use them, but we also talk about the people and businesses behind the tools. From the pros and practitioners to the providers and suppliers, they all have a story. And this is the Calibrate Tools Backstory Edition, where we have unscripted, candid conversations about the journeys of some of your favorite and not so well-known players in the game. So can anybody tell me when the price of gold was about $200 per ounce? Or when the first test tube baby was born? Or when that cult leader Jim Jones told 900 members of his church, the People's Temple, to commit suicide in Guyana? Or even just as bad as that guy, you had that serial killer David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. Remember him? Committing murders all across New York? Well, that year was 1978. And while all that craziness was happening, you had these four guys: Bernard Marcus, Arthur Blank, Ron Brill, and Pat Farah. And these four guys decided to create a company called the Home Depot. Now, when they created the Home Depot, their vision was to create a home improvement store that was larger than any other store out there. So obviously it provided more than any other store was providing at the time. Okay, so these guys had to get capital. So where did they get the capital from? Well, who wouldn't want to have an investment banker in their back pocket when they needed money? And that guy's name was Ken Langone. So according to the story, Bernard Marcus and his buddy Arthur Blank came up with the idea for the Home Depot in a coffee shop in Los Angeles in 1978. Now, these guys were heavily into DIY themselves. And if you guys don't know what DIY means, it simply means do it yourself. And because they were heavily into DIY, they already knew what their future customers needed and, more importantly, what they wanted. So rule number one, if you're going to start a business, preferably it's a business that you're already familiar with or that you have an affinity for. So the very next year in 1979, they opened their first Home Depot store in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think the headquarters is still there. And interestingly enough, their first stores were built in spaces that they were leasing from J.C. Penney. Is J.C. Penney still around? Somebody let me know in the comments. So about 2 years later, in 1981, they decided, hey, let's expand our territory out of Georgia and go conquer the known world. Well, they moved out of Georgia and established themselves in Florida, in two cities, Hollywood, Florida, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I bet you a lot of you guys didn't know that there was a Hollywood, Florida, right? You're always thinking of Hollywood, California. Well, they got a Hollywood, Florida. So about 3 years after that, they had about 19 stores generating sales of around $256 million. But they weren't done yet. They decided to attack and set their sights on the Dallas market. And how did they do this? Well, the old acquisition model. They simply bought out or acquired companies that were themselves in the home improvement space. Their first purchase was for $40 million, and they were expanding so rapidly that the cracks started to show in their financial rubber band. It was about to break under the load of debt and unchecked ambition. In other words, they were growing too fast, and anybody in business knows this is a recipe for going out of business. Now, you got to give it to these guys. They started a business in what some consider one of the worst, if not the worst, recession since World War II, at least in the last century. But they stuck it out by having a plan. So back on September 22nd, 1981, a couple of years after they opened their first stores, they went public on the stock market and raised a whole lot of money at that time, about $4 million. Well, that's a lot now, at least for me it is. But it was worth more back then. And they used some of the capital gains from the IPO to expand into Florida and eventually into Dallas, Texas by the mid-1980s. That's when they began to feel the effects of low earnings and high debt because of their rapid expansion efforts. So what did they do to stop the bleeding? Well, they cut back on the amount of stores they opened and sold about 3 million shares of stock at about $17 a share to ease the debt. And that was at the time at its peak around 200 million. By 1989, the Home Depot became the dominant player in the home improvement retail space, even passing up Lowe's, which was founded 57 years before Home Depot was in 1921. All this happened within a span of 10 years. By the time the 90s hit, Home Depot had started to diversify its offerings with installation services, how-to books and manuals, and on-site workshops for the public. All of these helped to solidify the Home Depot brand. All the while, the company continued to make strategic acquisitions along the way. And you see this aggressive acquisition strategy being implemented all through the early to mid 2000s, where they gobbled up or acquired multiple stores and smaller retail chains throughout the US. They even planted their stake in Mexico, where they acquired another home improvement retail chain. Matter of fact, I recall Home Depot acquiring a company called HD Supply out here on the West Coast, and that was just last December 2020. But that's for another episode. Since 2007, it's been a mixed bag for Home Depot. When the housing market crashed in 2008, thousands of heads were on the chopping block due to layoffs. Home Depot is on its third CEO. Right now, a guy by the name of Craig Menear. Not to mention the brand took a hit when a data breach was discovered in September 2014. But none of these events have stopped the juggernaut that is Home Depot. Home Depot continues to make acquisitions, and not just of brick and mortar locations. They even established themselves in the online world with their own website, and they acquire online real estate as well by buying out online brands. So here are some fun facts about Home Depot. Home Depot is one of the largest retail chains in the entire world, with locations in 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And they had about 12 stores in China, but they closed them down in 2012. The reason is summed up by a miscalculation on Home Depot's part of the needs of the Chinese consumer. The largest Home Depot is in Union, New Jersey, at about 225,000 square feet. The second largest is located in Anaheim Hills, California. At one point, Home Depot tried their hand at convenience stores and fueling stations to lure in or attract contractors. They were not afraid to delve into other industries like landscaping, home furnishings, and others. But these ventures, I would assume, couldn't hold a candle to their core business, and I guess they just cut their losses. So my prediction, and it's never 100%, is that Home Depot is like one of those old redwood trees that's going to stand the test of time. Why? Because they established a formidable brand throughout the 40 years they've been around. And a brand like that is hard to erase. So I'd like to conclude this backstory with a couple of quotes from Arthur Blank, one of the founders of Home Depot, and he also happens to be the owner of the Atlanta Falcons football team, by the way. So here's a quote from Arthur Blank. "We're the largest home improvement company today, and we did $30 billion last year, or less than 10% of the total amount of building materials sold in the US. So when people ask, how much runway left does Home Depot have? It's an awful lot." And here's another quote, and I'm assuming he's a runner. That's where this quote is coming from. "I run because it's so symbolic of life. You have to drive yourself to overcome the obstacles. You might feel that you can't, but then you find your inner strength and realize you're capable of so much more than you thought." Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Calibrate Tools Backstory Edition. And if you like it, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and hit the like button. And I'll see you guys in the next one.